the idea of a loving and monogamous relationship. The first is the promiscuous nature of porn. Pornography is simply sex for the sake of sex, pure carnal desires being fulfilled in a soulless and often degrading and debased manner. Pornography does not have a conscience for monogamy. It is by its very nature promiscuous, and the more partners, and often the more people that are involved in the sex act, the better. Both male and female performers have dozens, if not hundreds, of sexual partners over their career. This sexual variety is then seen as desirable by those who watch pornography. The idea that it is desirable to have one sexual partner who satisfies the every need of their lover is jettisoned for the notion that satisfaction comes from many different partners who all fulfill a different need and perform a different sexual role. Secondly, the sex acts carried out in pornographic films are not natural and loving sex acts between monogamous partners, but are often brutal and unnatural. The women employed by the porn industry are more often than not extremely beautiful, and the acts they partake in are extremely degrading, humiliating, and in many cases unnatural. Pornography is not just an attack on the foundation of the loving relationship, but it is a way in which the enemies of the West can revel in the degradation, objectification, and humiliation of beautiful Western females. And this is something I will come back to later. It is important to remember that sex evolved to be a loving act, not an act of violence or degradation. Yet in pornography, sex is more often than not degrading and violent. Women are dragged around, sodomized and degraded in a way that would not make a female feel loved, but instead make her feel used and worthless. Often, more than just two people are involved in these acts, making these sex acts the very opposite of a loving embrace. The effect of this is for men to see women not as loving partners, and sex not as a loving act, but to see women as objects to degrade and humiliate, and for sex to be violent and debased. These two key influences are the polar opposite of what builds a stable and loving relationship, and exposure to these influences, mixed with the mental issue of hypofrontality, means that those watching porn are less likely to form long-lasting relationships and would be more prone to cheat on a partner. And the consequence of that is, of course, the destruction of the family unit. In many cases, pornography is anti-white hatred. It depicts beautiful, young, and often angelic-looking white females being violently sexually abused. There is no doubt in my mind that those who push this filth get some sick satisfaction from watching beautiful Western females being degraded and humiliated in violent sexual acts in which they are treated like nothing more than pieces of meat. The females who star in these films are unloved, unvalued, and ultimately are portrayed as nothing more than soulless sexual objects. And this can be seen at its most extreme on a site called Blacked. Blacked is owned by Greg Lansky, a French Jew who also owns the sites Tushy and Vixen Adult Studios. Blacked is a site where white girls, described as nubiles because of their young, fresh-faced and teen-looking appearance, engage in sexual acts with one or more black partners. Because what better way to attack white society and morality than to show fresh-faced young European girls being sexually dominated and sodomized by African males? And just like with everything that has been pushed as an attack on the West, not only is porn addictive, but it also represents a slippery slope. As a drug addict becomes more used to a drug, smaller and less potent doses have less of an effect over time, causing the addict to seek out larger doses or stronger stimulants. And the same happens to the porn addict. Over time, softer and more restrained images and scenes have less of an effect, and the addict seeks out material that pushes the envelope of degeneracy even further. This overexposure to sexual material drives perversion, and sick fetishes emerge, further warping the mind of those who indulge in such material. But the problem with porn is that everyone now indulges in this, whether they wish to or not, as we are now surrounded by pornography and sexually explicit material. Pornography is no longer restricted to dirty backstreet stores and sweaty truck stops. Sadly, pornography is now part of the mainstream. So-called porn stars are now seen as celebrities and held up as twisted role models, and what would once have been seen as sexually explicit material is now shown on primetime television. At one time, teenage boys passed around tattered magazines with pictures of attractive, semi-naked young ladies in them. Now, these teens sit watching hardcore movies featuring sadism, masochism, sodomy, and a range of other debased acts, all streamed directly to their computers, tablets, and smartphones. But just not in Israel, where internet service providers block all porn unless people ask to view it. I take this from The Independent, and I quote, "The Israeli Ministerial Committee for Legislation unanimously approved the bill which forces internet companies in the country to censor adult websites by default. Backers of the new legislation claim that it is a way of stopping young people getting online. Backers of the bill said that the system would still allow people to see all the information they wanted to, but would keep children safe at the same time." End quote. The chief sponsor of the law, Moalam Rafeli, said, and I quote, "The damaging influence of watching and addiction to pornographic and severe violence has been proven in many studies with great harm to children. Today, it is easier for a child to consume harsh content on the internet than to buy an ice cream at the local kiosk." End quote. So whilst Jews in the West have been disproportionately involved in the porn industry, in the ethno-state of Israel, the filth that is so readily available to everyone in Europe and North America with an internet connection is blocked by service providers in order to protect children and shield people from the negative effects of viewing such material. This all seems rather hypocritical. While certain Jews in the West seem to revel in the negative effects of porn on the Western family unit and on Western morality, in Israel there is a powerful movement toward family values and protecting those values from damaging and degrading material. Make no mistake, porn is an assault on the West, something that undermines the cornerstone of our society, the family unit. It does so by playing on our natural sexual desires, by twisting those desires and literally warping our minds and altering the way our brains work. Porn seeks to turn sex from a natural, loving and monogamous act between two committed partners into something violent and debauched, and increases our cravings for numerous partners and leads to people seeking a promiscuous lifestyle that isn't conducive to forming lasting bonds or raising children properly. Those who push porn are not doing so because it enriches us or liberates us. They are also not simply doing so for financial gain, but they are pushing this damaging material because they have a deep-seated resentment toward us and our society. And crucially, they are doing it because porn is an attack on our family-friendly and moral culture. But there is an antidote to porn and the sexualization that surrounds us. And again, it is traditionalism and the moral values that stood us in good stead for thousands of years. We must embrace the family, and with it, the family values that helped build our great and illustrious civilization. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help spread the message by liking and sharing it on social networks. If you want to hear more from me, please hit the subscribe button, as new videos are posted every week. You can also read my book, The Fall of Western Man. It's available as a free ebook and in both hardback and paperback, and all the links are in the description below. Finally, if you want to join in the discussion with me, feel free to add me on Facebook, and you can now follow me on Twitter as well. Everyone's welcome.